Affairs, Government of India, eminent dignitaries on the days, excellencies and heads of missions in India, eminent past presidents of FICCI, industry representatives, respected members of the press and media, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to the valedictory session of FICCI's 96th Annual General Meeting and the Annual Convention. The topic, the theme for this session is Towards the Goal of Viksit Bharat. And before we begin, may I request the commemorative video of FICCI to be played, please.
With relentless momentum, our nation's economy has surged forward.
We also welcome Honorable
Today
Chief
we have
Guest with
ascended to the world's
certificate.
fifth largest
We
economy.
felicitate him
and will soon
with a
be the
Pashmina
world's
shawl.
largest.
And I would request President FICCI to also present a copy of the AGM publication, which was released in the opening session by Sri Piyush Goyalji.
Multilateral world across the Indo-Pacific and global south. Prime Minister Modi led our country in the G20 presidency, shifting world attention to women-led development, sustainable environment and multilateral initiatives like the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor. His Gati Shakti initiative has redefined our infrastructure development, while PLI schemes have turbocharged the manufacturing sector. The startups and innovation focus has ignited entrepreneurial spirits, fostering exponential increase in Indian unicorns. Our strides on digitalization, financial inclusion, and integration with global manufacturing value chains is bearing fruit, with who's who of the world making in India, from software to semiconductors. At the heart of this economic surge is FICCI, the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, the industry's voice for policy change. Since inception in 1927, at the behest of the father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi, FICCI has been aligned to the nation's economic journey and global aspirations by fostering entrepreneurship, innovation, diversity, and sustainability. From policy advocacy to nurturing business connectivity for industry through a worldwide network of over 250 partners, FICCI's imprint is indelible in making India a globally competitive economy. Our strong network with the government and industry leaders contributes towards making India the world's growth engine. Welcome to the FICCI 96th Annual Convention.
Thank you very much indeed. Once again, a warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen. And once again, we are honored to have the august presence of Dr. S. Jaishankar, Honorable Minister of External Affairs, Government of India, here with us today at the valedictory session. And I would now like to request Sri Shubhrikant Pandaji, President FICCI, to kindly begin the proceedings of this session with his welcome address.
Dr. S. Jaishankar, Honorable External Affairs Minister, Dr. Anish Shah, President-elect FICCI, past presidents, dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to extend a warm welcome to Dr. Jaishankar and thank him for being with us for the valedictory session of FICCI's 96th AGM and Annual Convention. And despite having a very, very busy schedule, he kindly committed and is here today, and I really am grateful. He's someone who doesn't need an introduction at all, given that he has captured the imagination of millions with his plain-speaking approach in an otherwise staid world of democracy. He embodies muscular foreign policy by calling a spade and looking hypocrisy straight in the eye. I'd like to talk a little bit about the AGM theme, the world's growth engine, which aptly captures India's economic rise and also the keen interest of nations to engage with us through FTAs as well as trade and security groupings like the Quad, IPEF, the newly announced India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, etc. And truly, I think India has emerged as the bridge between the developed and the developing world. So where do we stand today, and what is India's role, not just from the economic aspect, but otherwise? India is the world's largest democracy and that alone brings with it a certain moral standing. On top of that, the spectacular G20 presidency has seen India emerge as the voice of the global south by shepherding the inclusion of the African Union as a permanent member and also through its unflinching advocacy for equitable solutions. Our willingness to learn, our willingness to share our learnings from initiatives such as digital public infrastructure in particular has led to tremendous goodwill. As a result of rapid growth, India's standing in global trade has also improved. In short, everyone wants to hitch a ride with the world's growth engine. This is an era of complex geopolitics. While national interest has always been supreme, but the ability today to balance economic and geopolitical considerations is indeed unparalleled. Economic interests drive prosperity and growth, while geopolitical alignments provide stability and impact security. Clarity of thought is what is needed to strike the right balance, and that vision has been provided by the Honorable Prime Minister and ably executed by Dr. Jaishankar, as I said, with his ability to call a spade and look hypocrisy straight in the eye. The topic for this particular session is about Viksit Bharat, and I'd like to talk a little bit about what FICCI has done in that regard. The 2 points I wanted to highlight is we had a session a couple of months ago about the confluence of economic growth and diplomatic capabilities, and I think it is indeed true that both feed off each other. Today, India matters more because of its economic might, and its diplomatic capabilities go a long way in, in pushing that economic engine forward. Indeed, one of the highlights this year was a report on the new age energy minerals, which, besides suggesting more exploration within India, also recommended that we look at leveraging our strategic relationships to access critical minerals which are limited in their geographical location. I'd also like to take this, cite one example from Honorable Raksha Mantri's speech earlier today, where he very appropriately, gave the example of the world's growth engine being a rail or a train, rather, I should say. And we can truly say that we have arrived when the last wagon reaches, or the last bogie reaches the station. In that context, I think the Honorable Prime Minister's call for Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Prayas, I think that truly embodies what Viksit Bharat is all about. And I think that was in full display during the COVID pandemic and its immediate aftermath, where unlike advanced economies which focused on stimulating or overstimulating the economy, India was much more circumspect and balanced in how it approached that period, while extending full support to those at the bottom of the pyramid who needed a helping hand the most. Mr. Minister, this is a valedictory session, so give me a couple of minutes to reminisce. It has been an exhilarating tenure at the helm of FICCI. It was a great opportunity to learn and contribute to various initiatives, including leading several delegations to foreign shores. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank my wife, thank my family, especially my wife, for their love and support. My sister Paramita is here. I'd like to thank her and my other siblings, Jay and Neeta, for their affection and guidance. And I'd like to thank everyone at FICCI for their unstinted support, which made this year special. In conclusion, I think I'd like to state the obvious, that Prime Minister Modi's grasp of foreign policy and your vast experience combined with skillful policy implementation has indeed enlarged India's sphere of influence. Thank you for your leadership and your presence here today, despite a very busy schedule.
Thank you very much indeed, sir, for those warm words of welcome. And ladies and gentlemen, it is my proud privilege now in inviting the Honorable Minister of External Affairs, Government of India, Dr. S. Jaishankar ji, for the keynote address. Let's once again put our hands together to welcome the Honorable Minister.
Shri Shubhrakanta Pandaji, Dr. Anish Shah, Shri Shailesh Pathakji, past presidents of FICCI, FICCI members, excellencies, dear friends. First of all, let me say what a great pleasure it is to be with you on such an important occasion. And that too, as you are concluding your deliberations, I'm sure the last few days have been very productive. And my endeavor today would be to try and fit such thoughts as you may have uh, into the state of the world and what we, all of us, could do to take India forward. So the topic I had requested the Panda was to allow me to speak on going towards Viksit Bharat. Now we are, all of us, today meeting at a very important juncture. An important juncture because we have entered the Amrit Kal. We are also at the end of a decade of the Modi government. We have made big decisions, but clearly we are poised to make many more. We have nursed big ambitions. We have implemented much of what we had promised. But again, there are still a lot that we have to achieve. So to me, Viksit Bharat, it is both a vision to achieve as well as a set of specific goals. And the short description of it would be really how to make India a developed country in the next 25 years. Let me start with the domestic side. I think all of you would agree that while much has happened, much good has happened, the fact is also that the last decade has been quite tough. It was tough because we began it a decade ago with a lot of economic cleanup that was necessary, especially on the banking side. I think in many ways, faith in governance, faith in the business climate, faith in a desire to invest, I think all of that was flagging a decade ago. Some of it was the slow pace of change. Some of it was also that in our own minds, we were still comparing the pre-reform period with the post-reform period. Whereas we had actually done 20 years of reform and our standards of comparison, our benchmarking should have been something else. Now, as we reached the midpoint of the last decade, we of course experienced a once-in-a-century happening, the COVID pandemic. Now, I don't think anybody would dispute that amongst all of us today in the room, it would be the most scarring memory that we will carry for the rest of our lives. But as someone who traveled even during COVID and has traveled after COVID and has seen how other societies dealt with it, I can say with a lot of pride and with a lot of justification that India actually came out of COVID strong, that we were able to respond to it, and we were able to respond to it in an amazing way, because I remember as part of the group of ministers, we were 5-6 of us who were tasked with dealing with COVID. And the first few weeks and months, I can't even describe to you the feeling when you realize that you actually do not have that ability to deal with what is coming. Since as COVID receded, in fact, it wasn't just the bounce back, the social, the psychological bounce back that we saw. We also saw actually a very fast return to very robust economic growth. And the transformation which began a decade ago, that transformation once again picked up steam. I'll talk about it. And we have seen really today, the last quarter, I think the growth figures speak for themselves. But that's not the only index to judge how we are doing. And I would say with all objectivity that today, when we look around the world, no question that, and again, I've just today come back from a destination abroad. No question that the world looks at us as an exceptionally strong area of growth. Now, while we've had both our domestic achievements and our domestic challenges and overcoming those domestic challenges, let's take a look at the state of the world. The last 5 years have also been very traumatic for the world. If you look in terms of 5 big shocks which have happened to the world, the COVID shock, which was not a shock, it was actually a long stress period. Then what happened in Afghanistan with the withdrawal of the Americans, the impact of the Ukraine conflict, what it did to fuel, to food, to fertilizer prices, to inflation across the world. Now, the violence that we are seeing in the Middle East, whose future directions are anybody's guess, and the consequences of very sharp competition between the United States and China, and the implications that has for global supply chains. I think you can see very clearly this has been actually a very stressful period for the international economy. Now, politically, when we look at the world, the talk is increasingly of a multipolar world that people know. I mean, you don't have to be a political scientist or a diplomat today to understand that this is not a world of one power or two powers, that there are many more countries today in the fray. And that in many ways, I mean, while very welcome, also makes the world a more difficult place to navigate and to manage. At the same time, if one looks at the economic challenges of the world, today we are really looking at the consequences of what happens when trading rules are gamed, when competition has been unfair, and when actually the insecurities of the COVID era have caused many geographies, many regions, many big economies today to talk in terms of strategic autonomy. That, in China, they call it dual circulation. In America, they call it foreign policy for the middle class. In Europe, they call it strategic autonomy. But the fact is, today, the world is heading towards greater insecurity and more protectionism. And the nature of how trading rules have been implemented over the last 2 to 3 decades actually have raised a lot of question marks about its effectiveness and the credibility of the regime. So this, in a sense, is the scenario that we confront. And as the Minister of External Affairs, and obviously a large part of my attention, the economic side of my attention, is very much on how we deal with the world economically, how we support our businesses, how we support our consumers, how we increase our employment. I think as a government, there's one thing on which we are very clear. And we are clear on this, that while opening up to the world may be good, because nobody disputes the realization of globalization, the reality of globalization, excuse me. Nobody disputes the reality of globalization. We all accept that opening up to the world is good. But opening up to the world must happen only when there is a level playing field for our own industry at home. It cannot be at the cost of our industry. And I think that is one message which the Modi government has sent in a sustained manner over the last decade. With that context, if I can be a little presumptuous, allow me to talk about your role and responsibilities. Business today is something very much bigger than just business. All of you who are sitting here, in many ways, are actually leaders of modernity and progress. Because when you build the economy, when you build industry, as you expand services, as you propagate and spread technology, it's actually the ideas, the concepts, the projects that you do, the mindsets that you have created as a result. I think that, in many ways, is actually the engine for India's progress. you are also builders of national strength. And I think that is a larger responsibility that must always be in your mind. One of our concerns in the post-reform period has been that while we have concentrated a lot on growth, and understandably so, and I completely understand that at the end of the day, businesses have to look at their bottom lines. The fact is, it's in our collective interest, I would argue in your interest, that we build deep strengths at home, the way in which many other economies which all of you admire, have done at their homes. So it's, I'm not in any way diminishing the importance of international trade, and I'm not oblivious to the global supply chain. But I think it's important, especially for big business in India, to help build Indian supply chains, to support Indian vendors. Because at the end of the day, no country will be strong if it doesn't have its own supply chain, if it doesn't have its basic requirements. Certainly a large economy, a big nation like India, a nation with the kind of ambitions and future that we have, it is very, very important that we are Atmanirbhar. So I would therefore urge you, as you go about it, as you look at really growing your own businesses, to also see what you can do really to help others in the business chain who in the medium and is if they are part of our society. Is that you are all creators of employment. That employment will not grow in this country if business doesn't grow. I think it's a no-brainer, but it is not always something which is so clearly recognized. But if we wish to grow employment, it is important that we give the support to the creators of employment, only then employment will grow. In many ways, you are also the shapers of our image. You are shapers of our image, not just in a sort of broad branding way. I think business is a reference point for the rest of the world. Anybody who's coming into India wanting to invest will more likely go by what you say than go by what I say. Because at the end of the day, business will listen to business. And the same works outside. That if somebody outside actually has an image of India, wants to judge the prospects of India, wants to evaluate really how we are doing, where we are likely to be. I think the natural avenue for them to explore that is actually with the business community in India. So for me, whether it is modernity and progress, whether it is building national strength, whether it is creating employment, whether it is shaping our image, and whether, as a driver of development, because at the end of the day, any project, any business, anything you do, the ripple consequences of that are enormous. Every employee has a family. Every increase in prosperity has some larger consequence not just for the lives of those people, larger consequences actually for the entire society. So in many ways, if we are today really to increase, to deepen development, intensify development, make it much more inclusive, it isn't just the need for more resources. That is obviously very, very critical. But the role that business plays, especially the role that business can play in, for example, aspirational districts in parts of India which, for whatever reason, perhaps had got left behind, I think is tremendous. And so there is actually a social agent aspect to your activities as well. So if I were to sum it all up today, when nations assess each other, they don't do so anymore just in terms, a strong country is not necessarily a militarily strong country. It need not be even just an economically strong country. There is a concept of comprehensive national power. You put everything together, and it is that net assessment of how a nation or a society is, which is actually the value and the weight of that society in international relations. And a big part of that weightage is actually directly derived from your activities. So when we look at India's prospect, one part of it is what are we going to be doing with our own lives? We want to move towards a developed society. But if I were to look at India in the world, a large part of how the world would regard India is very much dependent on actually how business is doing in India. Now, as I pointed out, Viksit Bharat is clearly the goal for Amrit Kal. And we very much hope that this decade has actually laid a very strong foundation for that to happen. So let me rewind a bit and actually see what has changed in the last decade. Why is it that we even have the confidence to talk about becoming a developed nation? I would put it in about 4 or 5 broad baskets. One is that through this decade, in many, many ways, we have made it easier to do business. It will never be a done deal. It'll always be work in progress. We can never sit back on whatever achievements there are. But the fact is, if you look back over the last 5 years, then look back over the previous 5 years, and then perhaps the previous 5 or 10, there's no question today that there's been a very marked improvement in the climate for business and making it easier to do business in this country. The second, which is actually a broader endeavor, is something which the Modi government calls ease of living. Ease of living is actually how do we, I would say, de-bureaucratize the society, that in the many things that we want in our daily lives, many things which all of you need to actually do more business in this country, to invest more easily, to produce more easily, to sell more easily. How do we make the life of the average citizen easier, less burdened, less regulated in a cumbersome way? And of course, the example which I am most familiar with and which all of you have experienced is the ease with which today you get passports. So if you look back at what a passport meant, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I don't think you even want to remember. So my point is, if you look at what the government is doing to cut red tape, to simplify regulations, to make public services more entitlement driven, that government does services not because it's doing a favor to its citizens. It is doing services because that is the entitlement of the citizen from the government. And in many ways, that kind of belief is today trying to transform the manner in which the government responds to the expectations of the people. The third one, and I saw that briefly referred to in the clip before my talk, is actually what has long been the bane of our economy, and that's the infrastructure. So the impact which Gati Shakti is making, the whole idea, because one of our problems is we are actually, even by global standards, we are an extraordinarily siloed society, siloed bureaucracy, that it isn't just the left hand and the right hand, one finger or one hand doesn't know what the other finger is doing. So what we would have is, whether it is the railway, the power, the road, the water, the optical fiber, the airport, each one was done as an autonomous, sometimes even independent activity, sometimes as a result working at cross purposes and actually not using resources optimally. So the idea actually of bringing it all together, of having a kind of a master plan, not just a master plan, a coordinated effort to do that to my mind is actually an endeavor which has done well in the last few years. And as that gains more traction, I think we're going to see the results of that. A fourth basket I would put to you is the digital basket. The digital basket, because this term, digital public infrastructure, if in this year there are a few terms which have, I would say, come into vogue in my business, one is the voice of the global south, and one of them is digital public infrastructure. The idea that governments use digital backbones really to even with limited resources, cover a very large part of the population by doing it with all the efficiency which digital instruments can offer. And if we look back, I mean, all of you are familiar with the campaigns, the initiatives, the yojanas of the last decade. Okay, you can reel them off one by one. You know, Awas Yojana, Garib Kalyan Yojana, Anna Yojana, Mudra, Jal Jeevan Mission, Swachh Bharat, Skill India, Digital India. There is a range of this. Now, what is the common element? What is the foundation? Why is it today that the government, because if you look at these campaigns, just the volume, you know, the number of people covered in these campaigns. Individual campaigns have beneficiaries which run not just into the population of large countries, they're actually sometimes continents. That today, the Anna Yojana, we give 5 kilograms of food to 800 million people every month. That's the population of 2 decent-sized continents. That under Mudra, you actually give, you pay money into, again, about 400 million beneficiaries. That if one looks at, you know, even something like Awas Yojana, building houses, which is quite complicated. In the last 10 years, in urban and rural areas, we built 40 million houses, which at 4.8% average per family is almost 200 million, it's 190 million people. 190 million people is like housing 1.5 times the size of Japan in the course of a decade. So look at the scale of what we are doing today. That scale. And we saw that more sharply demonstrated during COVID. And because it happened so quickly and so efficiently, to all of you, it was very natural. I don't mean it in a bad way, but you all took it for granted. If you had gone around the world, you would have seen countries who are sitting on mounds of vaccine, who are not able to vaccinate people, their own population. If they vaccinated them, they didn't know how to certify it. If they certified it, they didn't know how to call them back for the second shot or the third shot. So this extraordinary change which has happened today in our country, this is riding on the digitization of India. That the manner in which today we have been able to vastly expand public services. You know, we can actually, if I had said a decade ago that there's a serious problem, because, you know, one of the preconditions to being even looked at as Viksit is you should have some kind of social welfare system. I mean, you know, what happens in a developed society? Your health is taken care of, your education is taken care of, your road connections are there, your water is there, your electricity is there. You don't have to bribe somebody to get your pension. You don't have to fix a postmaster to, you know, get your payment in, or your bank manager to get that. Today, all of that is happening. I mean, the one thing which we, you know, I say this very openly, all of us who went abroad for the last 30, 40 years, what would we come back and say? You know, those countries, there's no corruption. Because in the daily life of the citizen, when we went abroad, we didn't have to pay money for a driving license or to get a stamp on some document or to get a payment into something. That is today happening in this country. So it's actually had an enormous impact in terms of good governance. But I would say it's actually had, it's made a very, very big difference in terms of optimizing our resources and creating what will be a social welfare state in the making. If you just look at the numbers today, we are actually able to cover a third of our people in terms of health services. We are able to actually capture 2/3 of our people in terms of food support. a third of our people in terms of direct financial transfers. And certainly, what is a, like what you might say, minimum, it used to, roti, kapda and makan. That will no longer be the minimum. That would be actually a done deal. Because only when it is a done deal can we actually even seriously talk of a Viksit Bharat. And it will happen as a done deal if the Awas Yojana, if the Jal Jeevan Mission, if actually the electricity connection Saubhagya, if our telecom, because telecom has been a fantastic enabler of this. So when we assess the totality of this last decade, I would actually suggest to you, we are today looking after our citizens from pre-birth. Already the Asha Worker comes and, you start getting prenatal care to pensions. That is Viksit Bharat in the making. And at the same time, it's not that it is for some people, it's not in towns and not in villages, or not in some states and not in others, or not in some districts and not in others. We actually today are, this belief that no one left behind is actually happening in real life. And I can tell you this, those of you who travel to the remoter areas of this country, you will see today that what are services, services are not anymore to only the more accessible places. Nothing is anymore inaccessible. Not inaccessible physically, definitely not inaccessible digitally. And that, to my mind, is really why we should be confident for the next 25 years. So now, while I describe all of this, I would also say in this last decade, there has been a big mindset change. And I was reading something which our badminton player PV Sindhu had written. And she asked actually a very interesting question. Why Prime Minister Modi, who is a little older than me, should be such a youth icon? And she answers her own question, which is, she said, he has an attitude which the youth likes, which is kaise nahi hoga. There's no challenge we can't do. And today it is that mindset, when there will be all that I've described to you, the processes, the foundations, the investment, the technologies. But when you look at, let us say, the last year, 2-3 years, when you look at a G20, where we were able to pull off a successful summit, creating a consensus which very few people would actually believe happened, even on the day when we actually did it. When you look at the way we handle COVID, the fact that we were able to produce vaccines on scale, the fact we were able to distribute it in a very effective way, the fact that we just didn't do make in India, we also did invent in India. The fact that we were able to do something like Chandrayaan, that we not just went to the moon, we went to a particularly difficult part of the moon. Or, as I said, for years we heard that if you wanted to move into 5G, there were two sources. You either had to go to China or you had to go to Europe. Today we are deploying our own 5G stack. So in each of these cases, or even how we respond to what is happening outside. When the more people go out, statistically it's likely they will have more problems. But increasingly, you can see that wherever there is a situation, the tendency is saying, our people, we have to find a way, we have to solve their problem. So when you look at an Operation Ganga in Ukraine, or an Operation Ajay, which just happened in Israel, or an Operation Kaveri in Sudan, people today have that security, that the mindset of India has changed, that today we are a country we will not only look after our people at home, we will also look after our people abroad. And if our people get into trouble abroad, we are perfectly prepared to deploy all our national assets to actually go and bring them back safely. So I put it to you that, and again, I would like you to see it in the biggest possible, widest possible way. That when I look today at the buzz around innovation, the interest in skills, I even look at something like fitness. That if you see actually the emphasis on fitness in our own society in the last 10 years, it has grown. And it has not just grown, it is actually, you can also see it in the results of our sports performance abroad at an international level. So if you have a fit society, a skilled society, an innovative society, a society which says there's no challenge which I cannot rise to, one which is confident of finding its solutions, I think you are now on the journey towards a Viksit Bharat. And to do that, I would just say that we must do the reforms we should, not just the reforms we must. That the change which must happen must not be minimal, it must not be grudging, it must not be knee-jerk, it must not be reactive. It should be strategic, it should be planned. We should have a clear sense of where we are going, and we have to, plan it like you would plan a business. I mean, the nation should have a plan on where it wants to go. And today, when the government puts a lot of these initiatives across, when we say Viksit Bharat Sankalp, there's a Sankalp Yatra today about which the Prime Minister spoke. This is actually the yatra we would like the entire country, the entire society to make for the next 25 years. Now, many of you also know there's been a little bit of a debate about the word Bharat. So some people have taken it as a linguistic debate. Some people have taken it as a political debate. I want to give you my 2 bits worth. To me, Bharat is actually a belief and an attitude. For me, Bharat has an economic dimension. It has a political meaning. It has cultural, social, I would say even personal expressions. So let me explain to you what I mean. At the end of the day, to me, the term Bharat means don't let other people define you. Try and define yourself. That it has to come from itself, because that very term Bharat, which is so laden with symbolism, actually captures, it captures centuries of what we are all about as a people. Now, its economic dimensions are there staring you in the face. And the most prominent is Atmanirbhar Bharat. If you are Bharat, you have to be Atmanirbhar. And if you are Atmanirbhar, you will be Bharat. So, I say this at the premier gathering, premier organization of the producers of this country, that if we are heading towards Viksit Bharat, that Viksit Bharat has to be an Atmanirbhar. It has to be a Bharat where we will engage with the world confidently, but not a Bharat where we will engage at the world to the cost of our own people. I think that, to me, is actually a conceptual basis of what Bharat is about and what Atmanirbhar Bharat is about. Now, this has found expressions in a variety of ways. I mean, many of you know about production-linked incentives. You know about vocal for local. And I can tell you each one of these, if you look at vocal for local, these are very, very powerful motivational campaigns, and I can see it actually translating into people's choices. when I look at what all of us give each other in Diwali, it's not just the diyas. You can actually see the character of what we give to each other has changed in the last few years. But we have started discovering, and so I actually flag your attention to the Vishwakarma program. That if we have a tradition of artisans, if there are things which our ancestors have produced, these are, skills and crafts that they have nurtured for centuries. It's part of our identity. If we do not support vocal for local, if we do not support our Vishwakarmas, if we are not looking at Atmanirbhar Bharat, if we are not believers in Make in India, then it isn't just Viksit Bharat. It is actually Bharat itself which is at stake. Because then we start forgetting who we are as a people. So being a people is not just an existential issue. Being a people is very much also, there is a thought process, there is a mindset, there is a constant self-reflection among us collectively. So today, I would say, for me, the Bharat effort would mean how do we boost domestic production? How do we support domestic producers? How do we increase domestic demand? And as I said, how do we create our own supply chains at home in a manner in which many other countries have done? And I fully recognize this is not something which is easy, because there are costs involved, there are skills involved, there are technologies involved, and yet for all the difficulties, it must be a prime objective together both of the government and of industry. The second facet of Bharat is the political part, because there is a certain pride in being Bharat. There is a certain demeanor in being Bharat. So one part of being Bharat is also learning to stand up. So if others tell you that you shouldn't be doing it, I'm not saying therefore you should do it, but I'm saying we should reflect on it, and if it is in our interest, we should do. Our choices, diplomacy, international relations, good ties, friendship are not about giving other people a say in your choice. Our choice must be our choice, however difficult it is. I'm not a rash person. I would say we need to calculate, we need to strategize. Sometimes we need to soften at times. That is something which my business also does. But at the end of the day, there will be moments, and you all know we've had one or two of these recently, that when it came to our energy purchases, our national choices and national interests were supposed to be subservient to the political correctness of other countries who, by the way, had made their own arrangements to soften the blow for themselves. Or I give you a very different example, which is Quad, that, we were being hustled by a narrative that somehow by working with 3 other countries, this is something which is making somebody else uncomfortable. Well, if somebody else is uncomfortable, that's their problem. So at the end of the day, we have to do what we have to do, however difficult that is, however tough that is. And it is that confidence of being able to exercise choice after choice that will define us as Bharat. It could even be what happens at the border. Again, you all know, last 3 years, we've had an exceptionally difficult time in terms of the challenges on our northern borders. But even though this happened in the middle of COVID, yet we responded very resolutely, very determinedly, and to date, we still remain deployed in whatever manner is necessary for our national security. Or even in terms of, our own issues. There's no society which has been more traumatized in the modern era than us when it comes to terrorism. So putting terrorism on the international map, and making sure that it's not like in the world sometimes you feel terrorism in some geographies have a certain importance, in other geographies they don't, because who shapes the narrative assigns a certain weight to geographies. So how do you put terrorism, and again, how do you respond to it when it happens? So that sense of resolution, of determination, of willing to speak your mind, of willing to shape the global agenda. I mean, we have, I was with the Prime Minister when we went in for the COP28. Now, if you looked actually at the last few COPs, the most powerful ideas when it comes to climate action and climate justice are actually coming out of India. The solar initiative came out of India. The idea of a sustainable lifestyle came out of India. The idea of a disaster resilient infrastructure came out of India. Or the idea of a larger international grid, a one world, one grid. So how do you actually put your ideas, shape the outcomes, determine the narratives? This is also part of being Bharat. Obviously, there is a cultural side where our heritage, our traditions, our practices, we would like that to be appreciated the world over. You have seen already in the last decade how extensively and how I would say, I mean, it's really been really a joy to behold how yoga has been taken up across the world. Now, it didn't happen by itself. It happened because the Prime Minister had this sense of making this a global bonding, cutting across cultures, regions, and nationalities. Similarly, wellness practices, Ayurveda. But how do we actually spread our tradition? The fact that we actually have today a global center, WHO Global Center of Excellence for Traditional Medicine in India. That how do we spread this across the world? So because again, as I said, practices like yoga or knowledge like Ayurveda, these are all inheritances we have, and we have a collective duty to pass it on. But the other part of it is also, I would say, our own heritage, both at home and abroad. That when we look today at something which is a very standard global practice, okay? UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Please see how many we have today, and please also note how many of them actually got inscribed after 2014. After 2014. So I'm making a point here that if we take pride in our heritage, if we appreciate our own past, if we are conscious of our identity, if we would like the world to know who we are as a people, then we will also deal with the rest of the world in a way in which they will understand and appreciate and value. So my plea to all of you is really these practices, because you're all extraordinarily influential people. Each one of you moves in circles where there are other equally influential people with whom you interact. How do you get them to visit India? How do you get them to take more interest in things Indian? As I say, the gifts that you give, I saw the Prime Minister had this Wed in India post, I think yesterday. And I would say it even extends to building and supporting institutions. That if you have today, we do a lot in India, but many of us, I'm not saying we shouldn't do things abroad. But at the end of the day, if you are in a particularly philanthropic mood, I would urge you, please look at your own society. I'm not asking you not to look at others. I'm just asking you, please look at your own society. So let me end in a way with having spoken about the nation, about the government, about societies. I would be remiss as a minister if I didn't make a departmental pitch. Okay, I am heading a ministry, so they will ask me, you went to FICCI, so what did you say there? And I want to tell you really today how much the attitude of embassies and the foreign ministry and actually, honestly, all of government has changed. So for us today, supporting exports, working to enhance your market access is actually our number one goal. Number two is actually when you go abroad, many of you, would know the lay of land, but may not know it so well. So how can we, the embassies, the doors of the embassies are there, and I can tell you, and I think you know this well, the doors have become wider and wider open. That today, ambassadors and commercial officers proactively reach out to business saying, we'd be very happy if you can come here, tell us what we can connect you up. So how do we support your operations abroad? How do we ensure that you actually are most successful? The third, which is our expectation of the business community of India, which is this new opportunity that has arisen about global supply chains which are in the making. That post-COVID, with all the frictions, the geopolitical frictions that are going on, there is today actually a very interesting set of different supply chains coming up in areas like semiconductor, for example, or even in renewables, in critical emerging technologies, in the digital world, in the telecom world. So how do we actually today get into that global supply chain? Because until we are part of that global supply chain, there is a threshold to how much we can grow. So to be on the journey towards Viksit Bharat, we need to be on a global supply chain. The fourth pertains to the procurement of resources. Every time I look at our trade figures, for me, it is striking how much of an importer of natural resources we are. And therefore, why it is important to actually cultivate those countries and those relationships which would give us guaranteed access to natural resources, because our businesses will need that. The fifth is in facilitating mobility. Facilitating mobility because your businesses will require mobility abroad. You will go abroad more and more. You will need people to support your operations because that is today the nature of the evolving business. But there is also a global, because of shifting demographics, there is a global demand for talent, for skills. So from my first 30 years in diplomacy, we used to pursue countries saying, please ease up on your visas and find ways of letting our nationals in. Today, I actually see the tables turned. That particularly in Europe, to some extent, I've seen it in Japan, in Korea, that in Australia, that there is actually a demand for Indian skills and Indian talent. And our challenge is how do you create a regime so that you have not just mobility, but non-discriminatory mobility, that our people there are given their full rights, they're not underpaid or, under-benefited in some manner. The sixth, which is for us a challenge, both at home and abroad, is really the protection from unfair competition. That how do we get the data? How do we build the understanding? How do we make sure that feeds into policies? How then do we build our defenses? And how do we take action against unfair competition? Because for too long, this country has put up with unfair competition in the name of, there's a globalization era, aisa hi hota hai, we have to live with it. We don't have to live with it. If competition is unfair, we must have the ability to call it out. And finally, how do we help with the globalization of India? Because the world is globalizing. History is on our side. Every measurable index is working in our favor. In that 25 years is not just about growing in India as a Viksit Bharat. it is actually also growing in the world as a Viksit Bharat. So having said that, let me conclude on a sort of motivational note. I would say perhaps about 15 years ago, we used to be called the back office of the world. Today, we are called the pharmacy of the world. We are called the designer of the world. We are called the researcher of the world. We are called the producer of the world. We are called the digital, in a sense, the digital pioneer, if you would. When we speak about our achievements, it is something real, contemporary, impactful for the rest of the world. I take the conversation on subjects like vaccine, the medicines we provided, the 5G stack that we are rolling out, the UPI payments, which dwarf every other competitive source out there, the Tejas that the Prime Minister has just flown in. So we strive for food security, for energy security. These are long-standing problems, but for which we need to find better and better solutions. But what I can say is, as we move into the next 25 years, whether it is a challenge like EV or a challenge like AI, this country needs to pull up its socks, get ready. I think this decade has laid the foundation for it. Prime Minister once he has a turn of phrase. So he said it's both about tradition and technology. How do we get it both together? I think in a way, for us today, it's also both about being more nationalist and being international. How do we, again, find the balance? How do we reconcile both together? And what I can say is that it is only through continuous progress today that we can really lay the basis for greatness tomorrow. I'm completely convinced that we can all do that, but we can do that only when there is a full and absolutely charged up partnership with all of you. So once again, I want to say it's been a real pleasure sharing my thoughts with you today, and I wish you all the best to you, sir, as you hand over charge, and to Dr. Anish Shah as he takes over. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Honorable Minister, sir. And ladies and gentlemen, may I now invite Dr. Anish Shah, President-elect FICCI and Group CEO and MD Mahindra Group, to kindly propose a few words of thanks.
Dr. Jaishankar and dignitaries on and off the dais. In the recent past, India has faced various pressures, and you outlined some of them. And we were expected to conform. But we did not. India stood tall, led by our Honorable Prime Minister and by yourself. And India has thus taken its rightful place as a leader on the world stage. It stood tall on principles and has put forth the human-centric approach to global leadership. So the responses that you've given in various difficult situations make us proud as Indians to see India leading from the front. The world today is indeed a dangerous place. Harvard professor Rabi Abdullah, who's the leading geopolitical observer, has quoted Tom Stoppard in saying that the future is disorder. He talks about the global situation. The future is disorder. It is the best possible time to be alive when almost everything we knew is wrong. In a time like this, we are fortunate to have you at the helm of India's foreign policy. In conclusion, you've outlined a very clear ask of industry. to establish economic leadership around the world. On behalf of industry, our members, we pledge to make that a reality. We will make in India for the world. And we will beat competitors not only in India, but around the world. We will achieve Viksit Bharat.
Thank you, sir. May I now call upon stage all the past presidents of FICCI for the group photograph with the Honorable Minister.